the Home Office Minister, Chris Philp, has followed up on his promise yesterday to speak to colleagues about claims that children's visas are not being approved at the same time as their parents. We can speak now to the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey. James Heappey, I know that you have been doing a number of interviews this morning, so I'm not sure whether you were able to listen to the experiences there of women, like thousands of people here in the UK, who are opening their arms to mums like Nastia, getting away from the horrors of Odessa in Ukraine, but waiting 3 weeks for their visas to be approved. These people are under fire. Mums are losing their lives in cities like Odessa. Yesterday, your government colleague, Chris Philp, promised that he would take up the issue of family visas being processed at the same time. What can you tell us about the delays in the processing?
Well, morning, Suzanne. Morning, Ed. I only caught the back end of your interview, but it sounds very familiar to lots of casework that I've been taking on in my own constituency, where families have been trying to help bring people to the UK as quickly as possible. I think it's important to note that the process of getting a visa and coming to the UK is separate to being able to leave the place where you are immediately under fire and in danger. And lots of Ukrainian families have left eastern Ukraine and the cities that are still under fire and then sought their visa as part of their onward movement thereafter. 71,000 visas have now been approved. I hear every day from constituents who want it to be quicker.
I'm sorry, Mr. Heappey, I'm going to interrupt because we are talking about the visas for people applying under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Yeah. Not all of the visas. This is a specific problem with the Homes for Ukraine scheme. And out of almost 66,000 applications, only 6,600 people have arrived. That is the number that we're focusing on. 66,000 applications, almost 40,000 issued, but only 6,600 have arrived. And one of the problems is because the parents' visas are being processed, the children's visas aren't. No parent can travel without their children, can they?
No, I completely agree. I'm afraid, and Suzanne, you'll have to forgive me, I can give you chapter and verse on what we're doing to try to help those Ukrainian families from not needing to leave their homes in the first place. But I'm afraid I would need to come back onto your show later on, having gone away and got some answers on that particular issue. And I hope you'll forgive me that that's the case.
The truth is, Mr. Heappey, it's not really for the Defence Ministry to answer questions about visa policy. It's for the Home Office. But, I can tell you from our own experience, we applied at the beginning of the scheme. We identified a family 3.5 weeks ago. All the application is in. We're still waiting. This family is still stranded in Budapest. And it's just, as a citizen, it's really hard to understand why these things can't happen more quickly, because the MOD knows about dealing with emergencies. What is it about the Home Office which means that they don't seem to understand the urgency?
Well, look, Ed, I'm not going to be disparaging about what the Home Office is doing, because there's a huge volume of applications. They are working through them at best speed. The issue that you've raised about the disparity between parental applications and those of their children, I've actually had a very similar piece of casework within my constituency from Emily Evis, actually, the person who runs the Glastonbury Festival. So I'm aware of the problem. I can't tell you that I'm necessarily aware of what the solution is, but I understood from your introduction that Chris yesterday had undertaken to go in, speak about it, and has done so. I hope that the Home Office will want to update you on that, and I'm embarrassed not to be able to offer your viewers chapter and verse now as the government spokesman of the morning, but I'm afraid that my efforts are very much focused on Ukrainians not having to leave their homes in the first place.
Exactly right. And Mr. Heappey, I know it's a different...
bring them success.
I know it's a different department, but you know, as Armed Forces Minister, only too well what these families are fleeing. That's the tragedy of it. And,
Exactly.
and I know you're focused on Ukraine and what we can do for Ukraine. We are trying to help children who are traumatised by that conflict. And we are making them wait in temporary accommodation for weeks before they're allowed to come here. If you go to another European country, you can go immediately.
But Suzanne, you're getting no argument from me about that being inappropriate and wrong. I think you heard from Chris yesterday, and I'm certain that Home Office ministers will want to address that. But rightly or wrongly, I've made a sort of commitment to myself that when I come on these interviews, I will do my best to reflect the government position as much as I understand it. And when I don't know it, I won't pretend to, because I think your viewers deserve more than a minister bluffing their way through an interview. I don't know the answer to a question other than to empathise and to say that from my own experience of casework, I've seen exactly these sorts of cases. I'm sure the Home Office will want to resolve it, and you heard so from Chris yesterday. I'm sure you'll get clarification quite soon.
And I think that is kind of very, very straight and correct of you, and thank you very much indeed for that answer. Can I ask you a question about defence policy squarely in your area? This is a backward-looking question. It was the front page of the Sunday Times at the weekend, and the former Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, saying he now looks back with regret on the fact that Ukraine was asking for years and years for military support, and we as a country were deciding not to give that support. I was just interested to know how you reflect upon that now, because clearly your department has been absolutely in the vanguard of supporting Ukraine in this period and are doing so now superbly. But did we get behind the curve as a country, as NATO, as a world in our understanding of what was happening in Ukraine? Because we said no to the Ukrainians.
Well, I mean, the PM said as much. You know, the international response to the annexation of Crimea in 2014 was, I think, history will judge, was rather too quick to forgive, forget, and hope that we would move on. And there's been an optimism bias in our relationship with Russia ever since. Now, the UK was not one of the sort of leading drivers in that settlement after Crimea, and the work that we did in the intervening years to train the Ukrainian armed forces and the speed at which we started to provide military aid ahead of the conflict means that our conscience is probably clearer than some others. But it is entirely right. And Ed, I think it probably extends further than the reaction to Crimea. You might also see that this is an arc that began with our response to Russian involvement in Syria. And I think there is 20 years or more.
It's a cross-party issue, Mr. Heappey. No arguing about it being cross-party. In the end, though, we all thought that diplomacy would work with Putin, and in retrospect, it didn't.
I agree.
Right. What do we do next, Mr. Heappey?
Sorry. Yeah, but I do. I think that exactly right.
But what do we do next?
Well, I think what we're doing, which is to draw a line and to actually say, look, this behaviour won't be tolerated. Ukraine is a free, sovereign nation. Yeah. The elected leader of Ukraine has said that he wants to restore the territorial integrity of his country.
Yeah, but do we get further militarily involved if you're saying we've drawn a line?
No, well, I think the line that we've drawn, and I think it surprised the Kremlin, to be honest with you, that the international consensus that has emerged is far stronger and far broader than the Kremlin ever thought that it would be. The strength of the sanctions regime internationally
It's not stopping him, Mr. Heappey, is it? It's not stopping him.
Well, Suzanne, who knows where this could have gone, and what has happened as a consequence of Ukrainian tenacity, the speed at which the international community has delivered military aid, and as a consequence of the impact of the sanctions on Russian military supply chains, the Russians have already had to reconsider their strategic objective, so that instead of it being to invade the whole of Ukraine, they have now had to withdraw from Kyiv and areas in northern Ukraine, recock and come in from the east. And they are now in what I think is a much more equal force-on-force conflict in the Donbass, where the Ukrainians have the best of their armed forces in defensive positions that have been dug in over the course of nearly a decade and will be incredibly hard for the Russians to defeat.
OK,
and
all right.
To the point that, there are TV correspondents on our screens this morning reporting live from Kyiv. I've even seen a reporter reporting live from Dnipro. I mean, that is extraordinary compared to where we were 6 weeks ago. So I don't accept that we've had no impact on Putin. We demonstrably have, and we should be proud of that. But
let's hope we've had an impact.
We appreciate your candour, your straight talking, and as you said, it's for the Home Office to answer the questions about visas, and we're hoping they'll do that tomorrow. But you've given very straight answers to the defence questions today, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed, James Heappey, Defence Minister.
Thank you.
Yeah.